Was the head knowledge alone enough for Negroes to make progress, or did they have to work with their hands? Now, Mr. Booker T. Washington thought they needed both, lest the head be filled with information that could not assist with dealing with practical everyday issues. And so we've heard a bit about the backstory on Mr. Washington, and now we'll be switching from his autobiography to a different essay called The Industrial Education for the Negro. And it was published in 1903 with a collection of other essays that made up what is called the Negro Problem, right? Which we have here in the Booker T. Washington collection. So let's open this up and see what he has to say. Integrity. One of the most fundamental and far-reaching deeds that has been accomplished during the last quarter of a century has been that by which the Negro has been helped to find himself and to learn the secrets of civilization, to learn that there are a few simple cardinal principles upon which a race must start its upward course, unless it would fail, and its last estate be worse than its first. It has been necessary for the Negro to learn the difference between being worked and working, to learn that being worked meant degradation, while working means civilization, that all forms of labor are honorable, and all forms of idleness disgraceful. And this needed to be taught because some Negroes carried the idea that freedom meant freedom from work. But Mr. Washington wanted to instill freedom through work. It has been necessary for him to learn that all races that have got upon their feet have done so largely by laying an economic foundation, and in general, by beginning in a proper cultivation and ownership of the soil, and not by waiting for a deity to come down to earth to save them from something that they could save themselves from. 40 years ago, my race emerged from slavery into freedom. If, in too many cases, the Negro race began development at the wrong end, it was largely because neither white nor black properly understood the case. Nor is it any wonder that this was so, for never before in the history of the world had just such a problem been presented as that of the two races at the coming of freedom in this country. What happened in the United States was a very unique circumstance. Never has there been people who have been so thoroughly destroyed in the mind for generations and then suddenly set free to exist in the same nation as the people who were so thoroughly committed to destroying them, right? So this situation altogether was new. For 250 years, I believe the way for the redemption of the Negro was being prepared through industrial development. Through all those years, the Southern white man did business with the Negro in a way that no one else has done business with him. In most cases, if a Southern white man wanted a house built, he consulted a Negro mechanic about the plan and about the actual building of the structure. If he wanted a suit of clothes made, he went to a Negro tailor, and for shoes, he went to a shoemaker of the same race. In a certain way, every slave plantation in the South was an industrial school. On these plantations, young colored men and women were constantly being trained not only as farmers, but as carpenters, blacksmiths, wheelwrights, brick masons, engineers, cooks, laundresses, sewing women, and housekeepers. I do not mean in any way to apologize for the curse of slavery, which was a curse to both races, but in what I say about industrial training in slavery, I am simply stating facts. This training was crude and was given for selfish purposes. It did not answer the highest ends because there was an absence of mental training in connection with the training of the hand. Meaning they weren't trained how to think. It was more so robotic. They were trained how to use their hands, but not how to use their head. And both are required to reach the highest level from Mr. Washington's view. To a large degree, though, this business contact with the Southern white man and the industrial training on the plantations left the Negro at the close of the war in possession of nearly all the common and skilled labor in the South. The industries that gave the South its power, prominence, and wealth prior to the Civil War were mainly the raising of cotton, sugarcane, rice, and tobacco. Before the way could be prepared for the proper growing and marketing of these crops, forests had to be cleared, houses to be built, public roads and railroads constructed. In all these works, the Negro did most of the heavy work, and the white owners did most of the mental work, managing, securing contracts, financial assessments, planning, organizing, and directing, right? This is work too, but it's of the opposite nature of the heavy work Negroes were forced to do. In the planting, cultivating, and marketing of the crops, not only was the Negro the chief dependence, but in the manufacture of tobacco, he became a skilled and proficient workman, and in this, up to the present time in the South, holds the lead in the large tobacco manufactories. In most of the industries, though, what happened? For nearly 20 years after the war, except in a few instances, the value of the industrial training given by the plantations was overlooked. Negro men and women were educated in literature, in mathematics, and in the sciences, with little thought of what had been taking place during the preceding 250 years, except, perhaps, as something to be escaped, to be got as far away from as possible, which to a degree is understandable. They viewed working in those trades as synonymous with slave labor, which made them want to escape from it. But the problem, Mr. Washington points out, was that the liberal education they began to take up didn't provide relevant skills for the economy in the places they lived. But the industrial education did. As a generation began to pass, those who had been trained as mechanics in slavery began to disappear by death, and gradually it began to be realized that there were few to take their places. There were young men educated in foreign tongues, but few in carpentry or in mechanical or architectural drawing. Many were trained in Latin, but few as engineers and blacksmiths. Too many were taken from the farm and educated, but educated in everything but farming. For this reason, they had no interest in farming and did not return to it. And the problem with that is this. And yet, 85% of the Negro population of the southern states lives, and for a considerable time will continue to live in the country districts. They lived out there in the southern country areas, where farming was the principal economic driver. So it made no sense to him why they were putting so much effort into getting educated in the Latin and foreign tongues and neglecting the practical education, the suitable education, the things that would get them paid. Now, he predicted they would be in the country for a considerable time, and I'm unsure how many years he means by considerable time, but within the next 20 to 40 years of him writing this, many of them had took flight out of the country, which he may not have expected to happen as soon as it did. The charge is often brought against the members of my race, and too often justly, I confess, that they are found leaving the country districts and flocking into the great cities where temptations are more frequent and harder to resist, and where the Negro people too often become demoralized. So we see that he was against Negroes flocking into the city, just as Mr. Frederick Douglass and Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois were as well. They all knew that most Negroes weren't prepared for city life because, like Mr. Washington said, the temptations are harder to resist. The temptations referring to falling into the world of darkness and vice, the things that swallow up those who are not morally and culturally grounded. Think, though, how frequently it is the case that, from the first day that a pupil begins to go to school, his books teach him much about the cities of the world and city life, and almost nothing about the country. How natural it is, then, that when he has the ordering of his life, he wants to live it in the city. Some years ago, when we decided to make tailoring a part of our training at the Tuskegee Institute, I was amazed to find that it was almost impossible to find in the whole country an educated colored man who could teach the making of clothing. We could find numbers of them who could teach astronomy, theology, Latin, or grammar, but almost none who could instruct in the making of clothing, something that has to be used by every one of us every day in the year. How often have I been discouraged as I have gone through the South and into the homes of the people of my race, and have found women who could converse intelligently upon abstruse subjects, and yet could not tell how to improve the condition of the poorly cooked and still more poorly served bread and meat which they and their families were eating 3 times a day. It is discouraging to find a girl who can tell you the geographical location of any country on the globe and who does not know where to place the dishes upon a common dinner table. It is discouraging to find a woman who knows much about theoretical chemistry and who cannot properly wash and iron a shirt. And to be clear, he's not saying to neglect any of those studies. But what he is saying is that a person should at least have the skills to deal with the immediate issues surrounding them. In what I say here, I would not by any means have it understood that I would limit or circumscribe the mental development of the Negro student. No race can be lifted until its mind is awakened and strengthened. Come on with it. By the side of industrial training should always go mental and moral training, but the pushing of mere abstract knowledge into the head means little. You need hand skills along with mind and moral training. He views them as all going together and complementing each other. We want more than the mere performance of mental gymnastics. He wants more than a person who has a mind full of facts and information but doesn't know how to put them to use. Our knowledge must be harnessed to the things of real life. I would encourage the Negro to secure all the mental strength, all the mental culture, whether gleaned from science, mathematics, history, language, or literature that his circumstances will allow. But I believe most earnestly that for years to come, the education of the people of my race should be so directed that the greatest proportion of the mental strength of the masses will be brought to bear upon the everyday practical things of life, upon something that is needed to be done, and something which they will be permitted to do in the community in which they reside. You see? So he didn't mind Negroes getting educated in those fields, but he suggested that they use the knowledge in a way that's applicable in their community. Don't just have the information stored in the mind without any ability to use it to solve the real world problems. And just the same with the professional class which the race needs and must have, I would say give the men and women of that class too the training which will best fit them to perform in the most successful manner the service which the race demands. That's referring to the doctors, lawyers, teachers, and so forth. They should develop their skills in a way that benefit the community. I would not confine the race to industrial life, not even to agriculture, for example, although I believe that by far the greater part of the Negro race is best off in the country districts and must and should continue to live there. But I would teach the race that in industry the foundation must be laid, that the very best service which anyone can render to what is called the higher education is to teach the present generation to provide a material or industrial foundation. In the words of the late beloved Frederick Douglass,
every blow of the sledgehammer wielded by a sable arm is a powerful blow in support of our cause. Every colored mechanic is by virtue of circumstances an elevator of his race. Every house built by a black man is a strong tower against the allied hosts of prejudice. It is impossible for us to attach too much importance to this aspect of the subject. Without industrial development, there can be no wealth. Without wealth, there can be no leisure. Without leisure, no opportunity for thoughtful reflection and the cultivation of the higher arts.
So he viewed them as a consequence of one another, a way of climbing the ladder to reach the higher realms of thought. So in other words, if a person is struggling to get by, then most of their mental resources are bound up thinking about basic needs. But once a person is economically secure and productive, from industrial development in this case, they unlock more freedom to explore the deeper questions of life, art, and culture. I plead for industrial education and development for the Negro not because I want to cramp him, but because I want to free him. I want to see him enter the all-powerful business and commercial world. It was such combined mental, moral, and industrial education which the late General Armstrong set out to give at the Hampton Institute when he established that school 30 years ago. The Hampton Institute has continued along the lines laid down by its great founder, and now each year an increasing number of similar schools are being established in the South for the people of both races. Early in the history of the Tuskegee Institute, we began to combine industrial training with mental and moral culture. Our first efforts were in the direction of agriculture, and we began teaching this with no appliances except one hoe and a blind mule. From this small beginning we have grown until now. The Institute owns 2,000 acres of land, 800 of which are cultivated each year by the young men of the school. We began teaching wheelwrighting and blacksmithing in a small way to the men, and laundry work, cooking and sewing and housekeeping to the young women. The 1,400 and over young men and women who attended the school during the last school year received instruction, in addition to academic and religious training, in 33 trades and industries, including carpentry, blacksmithing, printing, wheelwrighting, harness making, painting, machinery, founding, shoemaking, brick masonry and brick making, plastering, sawmilling, tinsmithing, tailoring, mechanical and architectural drawing, electrical and steam engineering, canning, sewing, dressmaking, millinery, cooking, laundering, housekeeping, mattress making, basketry, nursing, agriculture, dairying and stock raising, horticulture. Not only do the students receive instruction in these trades, but they do actual work, by means of which more than half of them pay some part or all of their expenses while remaining at the school. Hot stuff, right? Of the 60 buildings belonging to the school, all but 4 were almost wholly erected by the students as a part of their industrial education. How many buildings? They had 60 buildings. Now, who is Booker T. Washington again? A man who was born in slavery at the bottom of the black hole. And look at what he accomplished with his school during a time of blatant and obvious oppression coming from the whites. You see, this is what can be done by those who don't keep company with excuses and don't keep company with the victim mentality, right? 60 buildings on his school campus is extremely impressive for any people in any environment, but even more so impressive from him, considering the time period and the discrimination he faced. Even the bricks which go into the walls are made by students in the school's brick yard, in which last year they manufactured 2 million bricks. Oh, snaps, I'm motivated right now. When we first began this work at Tuskegee, and the idea got spread among the people of my race that the students who came to the Tuskegee school were to be taught industries in connection with their academic studies were, in other words, to be taught to work, I received a great many verbal messages and letters from parents informing me that they wanted their children taught books, but not how to work. Uh-oh. This protest went on for 3 or 4 years, but I am glad to be able to say now that our people have very generally been educated to a point where they see their own needs and conditions so clearly that it has been several years since we have had a single protest from parents against the teaching of industries, and there is now a positive enthusiasm for it. In fact, public sentiment among the students at Tuskegee is now so strong for industrial training that it would hardly permit a student to remain on the grounds who was unwilling to labor. They shifted the cultural energy and made it to where everyone there loved work. So any new person coming in that didn't like work, they would have to face all that energy going against them. This is how you use peer pressure and conformity to work for the good of the people and not against them. It seems to me that too often mere book education leaves the Negro young man or woman in a weak position. For example, I have seen a Negro girl taught by her mother to help her in doing laundry work at home. Later, when this same girl was graduated from the public schools or high school and returned home, she finds herself educated out of sympathy with laundry work, and yet not able to find anything to do which seems in keeping with the cost and character of her education. Under these circumstances, we cannot be surprised if she does not fulfill the expectations made for her. What should have been done for her, it seems to me, was to give her along with her academic education thorough training in the latest and best methods of laundry work, so that she could have put so much skill and intelligence into it that the work would have been lifted out from the plane of drudgery. The home which she would then have been able to found by the results of her work would have enabled her to help her children to take a still more responsible position in life. Almost from the first, Tuskegee has kept in mind, And this, I think, should be the policy of all industrial schools fitting students for occupations which would be open to them in their home communities. Some years ago, we noted the fact that there was beginning to be a demand in the South for men to operate dairies in a skillful, modern manner. We opened a dairy department in connection with the school, where a number of young men could have instruction in the latest and most scientific methods of dairy work. At present, we have calls mainly from Southern white men for twice as many dairymen as we are able to supply. What is equally satisfactory, the reports which come to us indicate that our young men are giving the highest satisfaction and are fast changing and improving the dairy product in the communities into which they go. I use the dairy here as an example. What I have said of this is equally true of many of the other industries which we teach. Aside from the economic value of this work, I cannot but believe, and my observation confirms me in my belief, that as we continue to place Negro men and women of intelligence, religion, modesty, conscience, and skill in every community in the South, who will prove by actual results their value to the community, I cannot but believe, I say, that this will constitute a solution to many of the present political and social difficulties. They would begin fixing their own problems and climbing out of the pit. Many seem to think that industrial education is meant to make the Negro work as he worked in the days of slavery. This is far from my conception of industrial education. If this training is worth anything to the Negro, it consists in teaching him how not to work, but how to make the forces of nature, air, steam, water, horsepower, and electricity, work for him.
He's talking grown-up talk now, making the forces work on the behalf of the Negro.
If it has any value, it is in lifting labor up out of toil and drudgery into the plane of the dignified and the beautiful. The Negro in the South works and works hard, but too often his ignorance and lack of skill causes him to do his work in the most costly and shiftless manner, and this keeps him near the bottom of the ladder in the economic world. I close, then, as I began, by saying that, as a slave, the Negro was worked, and that as a freeman he must learn to work. There is still doubt in many quarters as to the ability of the Negro, unguided, unsupported, to hew his own path and put into visible, tangible, indisputable form products and signs of civilization.
The doubters were obviously the white Americans. They were not so certain that if Negroes were left to themselves that they could build anything that resembled a civilization. Now, I remember in Frederick Law Olmsted's 1856 book called A Journey in the Seaboard Slave States, that there was this Southern man in there that he talked to that said if all the whites were removed from Virginia and only the Negroes were left, that in 10 years' time, there would not be anything productive done. And the only thing that would be grown was the things that grew themselves, right? Like the weeds and stuff. So this is the type of doubt that many had about Negroes being unguided and their ability to produce civilization.
This doubt cannot be much affected by abstract arguments, no matter how delicately and convincingly woven together.
Meaning talking about how great blacks are isn't going to cut it. There's no amount of intellectual convincing that can sway the opinion. They need to see it happen in real life.
Patiently, quietly, doggedly, persistently through summer and winter, sunshine and shadow, by self-sacrifice, by foresight, by honesty and industry, we must reinforce argument with results.
No other way around it.
One farm bought, one house built, one home sweetly and intelligently kept, one man who is the largest taxpayer or has the largest bank account, one school or church maintained, one factory running successfully, one truck garden profitably cultivated, one patient cured by a Negro doctor, one sermon well preached, one office well filled, one life cleanly lived. These will tell more in our favor than all the abstract eloquence that can be summoned to plead our cause. Our pathway must be up through the soil, up through swamps, up through forests, up through the streams, the rocks, up through commerce, education, and religion.
And to add to it, this was supposed to be a community effort, not just a few individuals carrying the large load of all the people, right? Everyone was supposed to play some part in lifting the next person up. right? And so with that, what we're going to do is we're going to stop right here, and we're going to pick up in the next commentary on some more of Mr. Washington's views. And so I want to thank you right now for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.